Okay, this next person came over to my house in pouring rain one Friday night, and we were supposed to go to a Shabbos meal like a mile and a half away. And she was game to go, and I was so not. But the problem was the alternative was my kitchen, and I really only had a can of tuna. Really. But this person turned it into a feast. I'm not kidding. Like, there were carrots in the fridge that I don't know how old they were, but all of a sudden they were amazing and just made this tuna so good and Shabbosy. So Rochel Spangenthal, or will now share her magic.
I'm going to stand. So I'm not going to lie, I'm more than a tiny bit nervous, more than a little bit nervous, more than a lot of bit nervous. To the extent where, like, I'm used to, like, sitting around and forbranging with people, but that includes me sitting. So when I walked in and I saw the microphone standing here, and I just went over to Allah and I was like, no. Like, it's just not going to happen. I can't talk and stand at the same time. I don't know what you expect of me. And they brought over this beautiful couch, but I decided, you know what, I am going to be brave and I am going to stand. So one of the really difficult things about doing this rather than writing is that you won't think I'm as smooth as you might think I am when I'm writing, because you already see everything after I've gone through the process of thinking about how I'm going to word things and taking out every spelling error. But one of the great things about being here live rather than writing is that we get to have some kind of social interaction, mainly with me talking. But we're going to do a little social experiment. So that right there was 10 seconds of silence. So how many of you might have felt a little uncomfortable? A couple. Good, not many, not as many as I would think. I used to be terrified of silences. That silence I would run away from like the plague. I used to do anything I could not to be in that situation where I was surrounded by no one talking. If I ever went to a Shabbos meal and it was quiet, I would have stories to say. I would have divrei Torah. I would just talk. If I was ever in any location and I was by myself, I would have my iPod. I would have a book. I would carry around things that would occupy me because I just didn't want to be around quiet. And anyone who knows me now knows that I travel a lot. I've, thank God, had the opportunities to go to a lot of countries, and I tend to travel alone. And I am alone a lot of the time, and I am around silent a lot of the time, especially when I go to countries that they don't speak any English. And so back in the day, when I used to really hate these silences and I used to avoid them, there was one situation where I couldn't really figure out how to get out of the silences, and that was when I was dating. And I remember my first date. I was 20 years old, and I was super psyched. I had stopped talking to boys when I was 15, and I had been waiting 5 years to finally immerse myself in that environment. And I had never met this boy. I was set up. It was a shidduch date. But I thought I pretty much knew everything about him because I realized I could work for the CIA. I stalked this boy like no one's business. I not only Googled him, I knew his sister's life story, I knew his brother's life story, I knew his aunt and uncle, and the boy who was in his class 5 years ago. And so that morning, I woke up after 2 hours sleep because I was so excited, you don't understand. And I went to class, and I set a timer on my phone because there's this really nifty on iPhones, countdown timers. And there were only 9 hours left until he would pick me up. So I set this timer, and in the beginning of the day, I was super good. You know, in the beginning of the day, there were 9 hours, and then I checked 8.5 hours, next 7 hours, and like pretty much every half hour until I got to 6 hours. And after that, 5 hours, 58 minutes, 5 hours, 47 minutes, my phone battery died. And finally, I ran home from school because the day was finally over. I took a shower, I came out, I put on my makeup, I put on my clothes that I had picked out 3 days before. And I was ready to go. I took a picture of myself, I sent it to my parents, ready for my first date. And I looked at the countdown timer, 3 hours. And so, I hung out in my room in my college dorm with 2 of my best friends and roommates. And 1 hour before my date, my phone rang. And it was from a number I didn't know. And I turned to my friends, I was like, oh my God, I bet you it's him. And I picked up the phone, trying to make my voice sound as least squeaky as I could. Hello? And I heard this masculine, deep voice on the other side. And he said, hey, Rochel? And I covered the phone, and I turned to my friends, I'm like, oh my God, it's him! And I go back to the phone, and I said, this is she. And he says, I just want to let you know I'm coming in from Brooklyn, and I'll be there in an hour. And I hung up the phone, great conversation, and I know that he said those exact words because I wrote them down in my diary as the first real words that a boy ever said to me. And finally, he picked me up. I got in the car, jumped in, strapped in my seatbelt, was ready for super smooth conversations. And I found we had a lot to talk about, like the fact that it was snowing outside. And we finally got where we were going, to a really lovely hotel lobby. And, conversation was great for about an hour or two. And then it happened. The awkward silence. If you were reading this and I was writing it, you would see that awkward and silence both have capital A and S. And we were both sitting there over our glasses of Coke and just looking at each other and looking away, and just like, we were both pretty much, it was evident that we were drowning. And finally, he came up with something to say. And he says, this is a really nice place. So then, the ball was in my court, and I had to, step it up. And I thought for a while, and I was like, come on, Rochel, be witty. Just stun him. Say something that will carry on the conversation and make him think you're smart. And I thought, and then I finally came up with it. Yeah. And I decided that I would never be in that situation again. I was never going to have an awkward silence again. So I had a backup plan. And I came up with 5 things that I could insert here in case of emergency. Questions or really funny stories that I laugh at, and people should also. But it wasn't only that I had trouble when there were silences on dates. I had trouble being alone in general. Again, as I told you, I ran away from it. I had not only in case of awkward silence, insert here, but in case you couldn't reach your friends, this is what you should do. I also had trouble being alone in terms of my thoughts. If I found something funny and I posted it on Facebook and it didn't get 30 likes, I would delete it because obviously it wasn't very funny. If I bought an outfit which I thought was gorgeous, and my friends told me it was too colorful, which has happened on numerous occasions, then I would return it because obviously that meant that it wasn't very pretty. And I never quite learned how to respect my own thoughts. And now I'm going to look at my notes because I'm like, oh my God, what am I saying next? Fast forward, which is great. Fast forward 3 years, and I had just gotten engaged, and I was really, really happy, not just because, obviously, jewelry, but we're all friends, right? We can be honest. But I was really excited because it meant that I would never have to be alone again. I would never have to find someone to talk to me because he was going to have to suffer through that for the rest of his life. And I would never have to worry about awkward silences and awkward dates. But when my engagement was subsequently called off, I was thrown into absolute despair. I decided that not only was I going to die an old maid at the young age of 23, but that I would be alone forever. Now, I'm pretty sure back then I was also a little depressed because the week after my broken engagement, I don't exactly remember things that happened, but I do know that one day I realized that in the past 3 days, I'd watched 2 seasons of 24. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the TV show 24, but basically, it's 24 hours. Each season is 24 hours, meaning that in 72 hours, I had spent 48 of those in front of my laptop and another 6 in front of circulating cartons of ice cream. And eventually, after I did anything that I could so that I wouldn't have to think, period. I exercised like a fiend. I watched another 2 seasons of 24. I listened to music. And eventually my sister just told me I was staying at her house for a bit, and she told me, she was like, Rochel, you have to go. Like, you got to get up and you have to go somewhere. You have to go find something that you love and you have to do it. Like, you can't stay in bed anymore. And so I was like, okay, I can go. I could go somewhere. And I was like, well, where am I going to go? And I Googled green countries because I'm obsessed with the color green. And New Zealand popped up, and I was like, you know what, that sounds cool. And I booked a ticket to New Zealand. And I went there not knowing, I made an arrangement with the shluchim that I was going to work for them for a month, and I went there not knowing how long I was going to stay or what I was going to do with my life. And the first Shabbos that I was there, I spoke to an Israeli backpacker who had been traveling for 3 years. And he gave me a piece of advice. And he told me that for every country that I go to, I should pick one character trait that I'm going to work on throughout my traveling through that country. So that by the time that I get to the end of that country, I'll not only come away with, like, you know, those awesome pictures or great stories, but I will come away changed in a really specific way, in a way that I've chosen. And I thought, you know what, that sounds cool, and I could do with some character development. And I was thinking about how I could develop, and I thought, you know what, I really want to learn how to be alone. I want to learn how to deal with silence. I want to be able to come out of my room before I go out and not ask my roommate how I look in an outfit, but ask myself, how do I feel in this outfit? Because I used to do something when I wanted to make a decision. I used to go around from person to person and ask everyone for their opinion and explain the same situation over and over and over again. And not only that, I would go back to those same people and I would ask for their opinion, like, are you sure that was your opinion? Because there's this one detail that I didn't tell you. And I would stack up all of these opinions, and whatever came out on top, that would be my decision. And I wanted to learn through traveling through New Zealand what my own opinion was. And back to the notes. Yes, okay. So one of my big experiences with being alone was there's this mountain in New Zealand called Mount Cook. I realized while I was there that I had fallen in love with, like, hiking and camping and dirt. And there was this mountain called Mount Cook, and I went up with a group, and we slept up at the top of the mountain in huts. And in the morning, I wanted to, like, go exploring, and I told them, you know what, I'm going to start down the mountain, and I'll meet you guys later, which is the start to every safe hiking story. And I started going down, and it was gorgeous. You know, there was this cloud above me, like this layer of puffy clouds, and this layer of puffy clouds below me, the kind that you think you can hop on, but you can't. And the problem with really nice fluffy clouds is that when you're going down into them, you can't see anything. And at one point, I realized that I couldn't see the next trail mark. And I turned around and I realized I couldn't see the previous trail marker. And I just sat there, and it was wet because you're in a cloud. They don't look wet from down here, but they're wet. And it was cold, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit here, and either the mist will dissipate or they'll come find me. And I sat down and, I pulled out my iPod. And I was feeling super confident about myself, and I pulled out my iPod and I plugged it in my ears, and then I went to turn on my iPod, and my iPod was dead. It had frozen to death. And that was when I got scared. I wasn't scared because I was alone on a mountain and couldn't see 10 feet in front of me. I was scared because I was alone with my thoughts. And I sat there and I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? My thoughts started circling. And one more time, I'm so sorry. Right, yeah. Remember that social experiment we did in the beginning where you had to sit through 10 seconds of silence? So this was 10 seconds of silence times 1,440 because I was there alone for 4 hours. And for a person who's scared of silence, that's a really long time. And after a while, the silence kind of stopped. It kind of stopped being scary. It kind of stopped being silent. And I started tuning into not only the sound of the wind blowing against the rocks, but feelings. The feelings of the wind blowing against my face, the feelings of dirt when I would play with it, the feelings of the rocks that I was sitting on. And I started thinking, it was actually a time where I could think. And I started thinking about the things I had done so far in my trip and the things I wanted to do and the things I had done so far in my life and the things that I wanted to do and the kind of person that I wanted to be when no one was looking. And suddenly, it just stopped being scary. And it stopped feeling cold. And I started just feeling like, you know what? My mind is kind of cool. And I waited there until they picked me up, but I came down a little bit changed. I realized that I wanted more experiences like that, more times where I had to be alone. So I told my parents that I lost my SIM card. I took my SIM card out of my phone. I was only available by Wi-Fi on seldom occasions, which I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad, when you're watching this, really. And it was wonderful. And since then, I've had plenty of silences on dates. And since then, I have had plenty of silences while waiting for trains, but they haven't been awkward. They've just been comfortable because I'm okay in my own head. And silences are going to happen, and it's okay when they do.
Whoa. Whoa.
I finished. That was the end. That's okay.
Do you want to finish this? Please?
I actually think that's really fascinating because, okay, the truth is that I wasn't finished. But, because I was quiet, y'all were like, okay, well, now we need to make noise, right? Oh, wow. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we tend to do. And then because you made noise, I sat down. But I actually think that was a much better ending than the ending I had planned. Basically, in sum, I do think that was actually brilliant and wonderful, and I couldn't have chosen better. But I just want to state that, you guys, I know that it's a stereotype. The other day I was walking past a pizza shop, and I saw a family of 5 sitting on their phones. And, we all laugh about it, and it's a really common thing to see, and, it's especially funny when you see, 2 people on a date on their phones, and you're just like, what are you doing at a restaurant, order taken, you know what I mean? And we make fun of it, but it's not only about whether or not we're occupied with our phones, or whether or not we're binge-watching television, or whether or not we're walking around with music in our ears. It's about learning to respect what we think. It's about thinking something is beautiful, even if no one else around you does. It's about laughing when you hear a funny joke that you think is funny. And it's about respecting who you are, because you all deserve to be respected. Thank you.
Do you have a third ending, though? Because if it's just going to keep getting, like, more and more inspirational like that, we can do it again. It was, whoa. Can I also just plug Rochel? There's a certain identity crisis that I feel like I'm having on your behalf. That her Facebook statuses are gold, so you should like them because it would be a horrible loss to the world if she deleted any more of them. They're so good. And specifically, the ones that you write about, these people that you meet in the world, you are the real humans of New York. And I really think that Hevria should make that a real thing that you get to write and contribute to the world. And it's, I think, because you're silent and comfortable with that and so comfortable meeting new people that you receive so much story and wisdom and, I don't know, coolness. So thanks for sharing that.